this two-part series on how to prepare for death from the Buddhist perspective. So we have a temple full of people here in this room, and of course, you can all see we also have a good number of friends joining us from different places through Zoom. Let's see. So as we begin, we will first begin with some opening recitations. For the most of you, it's sufficient to just listen. Some of you have memorized, and if you have memorized it, I invite you to join me in the recitation. Oh, Mother, sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, who create obstacles on my path to all vision and all knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. All Mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. All Mother sentient beings, limitless sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. Thus, until I achieve Buddha, in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha excellent, I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity and other perfections. I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Excellent, I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity and other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings in the Buddha and Sangha. Most excellent, I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as have happiness in the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering. Of suffering, may they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. Rest in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment and aversion. May all mothers limitless as the sky have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering. Causes of suffering, may they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment and aversion. May all mothers, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering. Causes of suffering, may they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. They rest in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment and aversion. So now just take a few moments to let both body and mind to settle into their own places. In particular, it would be a good idea for both your body and mind to settle right where you are. Allow your body to settle into ease and rest. Allow your mind to settle into a place of ease and rest. If there's anything to do, is to maintain presence. So to maintain presence, especially at the beginning, some determination needs to be set. You have to say, right now, I want to be present here. Alert, awake, present. Present in a spacious way, not in a narrow way. And it helps you to have a sense of appreciation and contentment to simply be present here. Both this contentment and this determination can help both body and mind to just be at ease and not have to feel that it has to go here or go there or do this or do that. So there's a lot to be said about bringing up a sense of contentment and even perhaps enjoyment. Tune into how both body and mind feels good, even pleasurable, to not be busy. Or as they say, how good it is to be alive and to be present. At the same time, a sense of also saying to yourself, I need to get out of the way. Get out of the way of what? Get out of the way of body and mind, settling into the present place at the present time. Get out of the way of body and mind, content and happy to be with each other. Almost like looking at each other and gazing into each other and meeting each other for the first time. Finally, you can think of your breath as that bridge between body and mind. Not as obvious as body, but more obvious than mind or heart is breath. And just like body and just like mind, every breath is its own breath. So every moment of body is its own unfolding. Every moment of mind is its own unfolding, rising and falling, appearing, abiding, and dissolving, appearing, abiding, and dissolving, moment after moment. So all you have to do in terms of being present is simply a matter of a moment. If you succeed, if that's the way you think about this, if you succeed, then one moment is all that it takes to succeed. Just one moment, and then one moment, and then one moment. Don't be afraid to notice, to pay attention, to give attention to pleasant sensation arising as both body and mind settle, as contentment grows. Don't be afraid. You don't need permission to simply pay attention to pleasurable sensation of either body or mind or both that may arise when both body and mind is at rest. When both body and mind is content. Good afternoon again. Good to see all of you here. So this is fairly informal, so don't feel like you have to sit, a certain posture, sit unmoving and all of that. Just relax. If sitting on the floor after a while becomes tiring, you can hop up and sit on the pew there. stand up a little, if you get sleepy, hard to concentrate, and it helps to just get up. Also in the kitchen area, we have mugs, we have hot water, we have tea bags. So please help yourself to that. If this is your first time to Urban Dharma, so bathrooms are down the hallway. Then what else am I supposed to say? Right. Donation box is over there. We have been very fortunate that none of our programs we have to say to people, pay this much or that much. Sometimes we have a suggested donation. That's especially when we have visiting teachers and we have financial obligations to our visiting teachers and to the airlines and all of that. And then when we don't have a visiting teachers, we don't typically even say a suggested donation. And even with suggested donation, it's always suggested. There's no one policing. Again, the box is there. Drop in whatever you need to drop. So anyway, in the story of the Buddha, the legend of Siddhartha, so to say, it is said that he was born into a life of privilege. Later Buddhist tradition tells us that he was born to a king and a queen and all of that, although historically that was probably a little exaggerated. All religions over time indulge in exaggeration. And so anyway, whether king or not, whether royalty or not, we know pretty sure that he was born into a life of privilege. And not only that, but at his name-giving ceremony, his father had invited a group of sages, wise men, 8 of them, it is said, to come, 8 or 7, I forgot the details, to come predict the future of this son. It is said that 7 of them, or maybe 6, if it was only 7 invited, anyway, all of them except for 1, said that all the signs, the physical features of this son of yours indicate that he will either become a great king, a universal monarch that will unite all the kingdoms of the known world, or he will become a great spiritual figure, that this is his destiny. So the father heard that and was very happy, but the last one said there is only one destiny for him. He's going to be a great spiritual figure. Hearing that, the father goes, well, I think I prefer that he does not become that. So since the odds are a little bit more than 50% that he's going to be a spiritual figure, so I will do my best to ensure that he doesn't go that route. So we are told that because of that, especially because of that, right, although he was already born into privilege, his father did everything to prevent him, to protect him from going the wrong direction to become a spiritual figure. And so it is said that he was protected from all the things that might provoke a sense of what is wrong. So that went on for a while. At the age of 19, the father found him a wife, this beautiful and intelligent and impressive woman called Yashodhara, who was the daughter of a neighboring king. So an alliance was formed between these 2 kingdoms. And so he was married at the age of 19. And then for another 10 years, they lived happily together. It said that the father provided them with 3 palaces. And then later sources talk about him being not only having one principal wife, but he had 500 concubines. Probably the mother-in-laws were not involved, and so he was very happy, they say. So whether 500 concubines plus one wife or not, we don't know all of the details. But we know he was provided and protected from any reason to question, is there more than this? But at around the age of 29, it is said that he started to have some doubts. He started to wonder, what is outside of this? What is outside of this? Meaning, he never went out of his 3 palaces. And every time when somebody got ill and somebody got old, they just kind of disappeared, right? Because daddy is king. He can do things like that. But finally, he decided, I want to know more. Like what's outside of these palaces? So he's told his father, like I want to go out and take a look. His dad was like, oh, outside and inside, same. Yeah. And he said, well, if it is the same, well, then let me take a look. So dad said, okay, next month, So between this month and next month, dad did everything to remove any signs of something is wrong out of the son's way. And so he goes out with big fanfare and everything looks like what dad said. Well, outside looks like inside. Comes back. After a while, there is some kind of lingering suspicion. Maybe outside is not like inside. So then it is said that he snuck out. And he snuck out 4 times. The first time he snuck out, what he saw was people suffering from disease, sickness. And that really shocked him. So he asked his attendant. He said, what's that? What's that? And he said, this is sickness. This is illness. He said, what? What is that? Like, would that happen to me? And his attendant, a little incredulous, but knowing that this is the whole dream, right? The whole show that dad was trying to shield him, build up to shield him from the reality of that. And the attendant say, yes, probably. So he was really shaken in his head. So he came back. Weeks later, he says, I want to go out again. This time he saw saw signs of aging, the suffering of aging. Then finally, he went out again and he saw death. He saw funerals being performed. And then the 4th time he went out, he saw ascetics, people who have chosen to live differently. And he saw the serenity and he saw the calm that came from these individuals. So each time he asked his attendant, what is this that I'm seeing? And each time he was very moved, he was very shaken. The first 3 times shaken and moved in one way, the last time shaken and moved in another way. So it said that this finally led to him leaving his kingdom, leaving everything behind to find an answer to the question of how can we be free from sickness, old age, and death? Now, we listen to this story and, maybe the first couple of times you listen to the story, you're like, oh yeah, wow. And I don't know you, but me, after a while, I'm like, how is it possible to live till 29 and not know? People get old, people get sick, and people die. Even as, his dad did everything he could, On the other hand, they say that he was so intelligent. How could he not have known that there is sickness, there is old age, and there is death? Right? What do you mean? Till 29. I think we are all Siddharthas, which, by the way, his name means wish fulfilled. His dad gave him that name because that was their wish fulfilled. Mom and dad's wish fulfilled. Finally, a son, finally, a successor, and all of that, and wish fulfilled. Most of us have kind of lived lives of wish fulfilled in one way or another, so that when sickness happens, mostly it happens to other people. When old age happens, mostly it happens to other people. When death happens, definitely up until now, it has happened to other people. Yeah, I'm going to be old. Yeah, I'm going to be sick. Yeah, I'm going to die, but not really. Right? We live like we are gods and goddesses until we drop dead. You know? And in the old days, actually, you do live like that and then you drop dead. But now, for good or for bad, with medical science and everything, and this goes on and on and on and on and on and on. Right? And without, thinking much about that, we like, oh, that's pretty good, But back then, a ripe old age of 47, right? Doesn't drag on that long. There are no means to keep you alive indefinitely, right? And that's a whole other conversation, a whole other discussion we need to have. That is this necessarily a good? Right? But either way, whether 2,500 years ago, Siddhartha's time, whether now, old age, sickness, and death is sort of abstract, especially old age, right? This is the big secret. I'm 52. I don't think I'm 52. I think I've just been the same person. Until you do enough stupid things at the age of 52, then the body reminds you, hey, you are not. But then, of course, if you can keep up the body, which, of course, all the stuff that they sell you is to tell you the lie that it can go on indefinitely. And that's big business. So even though intellectually we know that's a big business that we cannot trust, emotionally, it serves us to trust that big lie that this body can go on indefinitely, and therefore your attitude can go on indefinitely and be young forever. Oh, be young forever, be youthful forever is simply to say, I don't want to deal with the fact that this body is of the nature of breaking apart, and I am not beyond the breaking apart of this body. This mind, this emotion, this me is of the nature to change, and I am not beyond the nature of changing. And finally, this life is of the nature of falling apart, and I am not beyond falling apart. These are not really things that we take seriously. Only when the Lord of Death sends a letter to us in one form or another, then we take that seriously. For about a few weeks, depending on how serious that letter is. If it is an eviction letter, then it's more serious. If it is like, hey, you have not been paying your taxes, it's like, yeah, we'll deal with it later. Right? because we have ways to kind of just shield that away. So we are all our Siddharthas with our three palaces and our peacocks and our, flamingo and whatever, and keep everything looking nice. And so we don't take the fact of old age, sickness, and death seriously. So the Buddha says three things. When you wake up every morning, he says, remind yourself with these three things. Death is certain. When it will happen is uncertain. Is it today? Don't know. Don't plan to, but don't know. And when death comes, what matters? Of course, in the Buddhist context, we say when death happens, your deeds is what matters. What you have done in this life. More technical, it says your mind, your heart, your mind. Maybe in other spiritual traditions, they talk about spirit. But the heart, the mind. But why I say your deeds? Because your deeds shapes your mind or your heart. So the Buddhist notion of heart mind, which we tend not to use the word spirit or soul, because spirit or soul in most traditions are immutable, unchanging, perhaps even divine. But in the Buddhist tradition, there's tremendous emphasis that no, that's not a given. Your actions determine the quality of mind. Your actions, physical actions, verbal actions, and then mental, emotional actions, they all determine the quality of mind or heart that will be present when death happens. And if there is anything that continues, that is the only thing that can continue. Your investments don't continue, doesn't go with you. Yep, the box of earbuds you bought this morning doesn't go with you. Your house don't go with you. Your career don't go with you. And sadly, your loved ones don't go with you. Nothing goes with us between this and what's next. If there is anything that goes, it's this mind, this heart. And what determines this heart mind, the quality of this heart mind, is our actions, our deeds. Furthermore, Buddha taught that, therefore, depending on the quality of this heart mind, where you go next is entirely based on that. So yes, Buddhists do talk about heaven, in fact, in the plural, hell, in fact, in the plural. You're like, what? Buddhists have hell? Oh, yes. Actually, from the Buddhist perspective, the biblical references to hell is rather imprecise. We have 8 cold hells, 8 hot hells, in between hells, and bigger hells and smaller hells. With a lot of details, actually. There's always a suspicion that Dante, actually the one that elaborated the Christian imagination of hells, probably came across some Buddhist texts on hells. So we have a lot of those things as well. But the main point here is that where you end up, if there is a place to end up beyond this, which of course I don't take for granted that you all believe that, but if there is a place to end up beyond this, right, it would have to do with not body, not the stuff, how much stuff we have, not even how many people we know, how deeply we know them, but it's the quality of the heart, the mind. And therefore, that's most important. Now, even if we say nothing goes beyond, even if you say, I know for sure, which of course is kind of absurd, right? I know for sure there is nothing. What? How can nothing exist? I think at best you can say, I know I don't know, right? At best, that's the only reasonable, as far as with reason you can go, is I know I don't know. So let's just take that one. That's reasonable, to say no, nothing. Well, that's as valid as, there is paradise, and in paradise there is Valhalla, whatever, right? All those. Yeah, so you can say I don't know. Leading up to that moment of now I don't know, again, what matters in the whole process of dying is your mind, your state of mind, your heart. I was reading this book a few days ago in preparation for this. By the way, there's a book, especially if you find the Buddhist tradition, and particularly the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, to speak to you. Although the book, actually, the author, the teacher, presented it in a way that resonates with most Buddhist traditions. It's called Living is Dying. You can buy it as a published book, or you can download it as a PDF. Living is Dying. In there, he quotes, he says that supposedly Woody Allen said something like, I don't have a problem with death, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Right? And so most of us are sort of like that. It's like counting on not being there when it happens. And we think that's a good thing. Right? It's like, no, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it's happening. Well, unfortunately, I don't think we have a choice. Like it or not, you're going to be there. You're going to leave it to, chance as to how that experience is going to be. Yeah, if you think that there is nothing beyond this, you would think, my last set of experiences, I want it to be positive. Right? The grand finale. Even for that purpose, even if you don't know whether these heavens and hells and multiple lifetimes or judgment day, true or not true, okay, well, leave that aside. How about grand finale to this story? How do we want to go? So we have two options. One, the fact that body and mind is going to fall apart, break down, no choice. Yeah. But where there is a choice is the mind or the heart can be elevated more and more and more and more. Body cannot. Really, body cannot get better and better and better. Yeah. After about 18, 19, 20, it's all just downhill maintenance, right? And pretense. But mind or heart can get more and more sublime, more and more spacious, more and more free. The extent of the heart and mind can go beyond life and death. So in part, just as a footnote, why the Buddha didn't really talk about a divine spirit in those terms is because he emphasizes the need to develop this. Meaning, don't take for granted you have a divine soul that's going to continue. Maybe you do, who knows? In a way, he has a pragmatic approach to this. And he says, why don't you keep developing your mind, your heart, to the point that you no longer, right, have your sense of self that is anchored on this body and this set of identities that you have picked up throughout life. Right? Throughout our lives, we have picked up so many sets of identities, so many hats that we have worn. Some of these hats that we have worn more or less didn't leave any imprint, but a lot of the hats that we have worn have become part of the new hat that we wear and part of a new hat that we fashion, and there's all in there, right? And to that degree, we're very proud of that. And maybe there's good reason to be proud of that. There's good reason to want to maintain all of that. But you know what? That is also going to go away. And if your sense of I is anchored on that, maybe it's no longer anchored on your vehicle and your house and your retirement funds and your impact in the world and all of that, but even yourself understanding of I'm this person who have achieved this or who have failed that and all of that, that too is going to go away. But that sense of I, is always there. So that sense of I, what are we building that sense of I on? The Buddha says you can build it in a way that is not anchored on stuff that is going to go away, and even your self-identity that is going to go away. That is how we become free. So you have heard a lot about Buddhists and their problem with attachments, right? Yeah, even these corny jokes, why can't Buddhists vacuum? Because they have no attachments. Ha ha ha. First time? Oh, come on. It's a good excuse, I suppose. Actually, that is like overstated, as if, Buddha has some vendetta against attachments, right? No, it's not. It's simply pointing out to us if we anchor our sense of self on anything that is not reliable, that is conditioned, that is compounded, then you will be disappointed. Because when it's time to move on, none of those will be there. Then the great sense of loss. And is that going to be your grand finale? No. You want to go completely unencumbered. Not because you don't care. Because see, when we talk about attachment, a lot of times people are very worried. They're like, well, what about my loved ones? I know, what about my loved ones? Am I supposed to abandon them? And we don't want to do that. In fact, there's good reason not to do that. To practice what the Buddha taught is not, to cut your ties with people. What the Buddha taught that I think all of us can practice, whether we're Buddhists or not, to varying degrees, is how can we free each other? How can we free each other? How can we give each other that gift of freedom, of not being trapped? Even to be trapped in love is to be trapped. Golden chains, diamond chains, chains. So entanglements, I think, is a better word for what's often translated as attachments. To be entangled. If what we are entangled with can deliver, well, no problem. But what we're entangled with cannot deliver. And so Buddha says three things, that you're going to die is certain. When it's going to happen, uncertain. Majority of the people who died today, up until this moment, yesterday, were not planning on it. In some cases, there is some idea, and in some cases, unfortunately, may be planned, but majority, we don't know when it's going to happen. And so we don't wait until, it's happening before we try to do something about it. In fact, the reason, in some ways, why we want to learn about, what death is and the process of dying and all of that is so that it changed the way we live now. So back to those deeds. What matters when we go or when we end, depending on what you think is on the other side, are our deeds now. How we live our lives now. So, of all, the Buddha says, of all contemplations, the or awareness, the awareness of death. And this death, right, it's not just like the death that we're talking about here. In fact, the Buddha also starts pointing to us to see how between today and tomorrow, going to sleep is a mini death. So there are these trainings. When you go to sleep every night, you say, I'm experiencing a mini death. And then between moments in life are even smaller units of death. Then for people who practice Buddhist meditation, to be able to see each moment of thought arising, abiding, and dissolving, arising, abiding, and dissolving, these moment to moment, these are also moments of birth and death, and birth and death, and birth and death. So the more we habituate seeing these moments, experiencing these moments of birth and death, and birth and death, and birth and death, in some ways, right, also having some kind of indirect assurance that all these moments of birth and death and birth and death, we are already undergoing that and experiencing that now. It's just we're not noticing. When we begin to notice and pay attention to that, then we begin to pay attention to the daily going to sleep as a process of death. And then finally, the big death. In a way, right? I mean, looking at it from a secular humanist point of view, death is only a problem for the people who are stuck with your corpse. And paperwork. Yeah. 7 years later, you'll still get letters about, you owe us some money, or we owe you some money. Or whoever passed away, you are the executor of the will, So from that point of view, right? So we start with, in terms of this, what I want to talk about this weekend and next weekend, actually start by settling your affairs. So, in the tradition of wandering monks and nuns in East Asia, each time a monk or nun travels to go on pilgrimage or to go visit, to learn from different teachers, it's said that you need money for your own travel expense, but you have to have another sum of money which you put somewhere else. And that money is so that whoever discovers your dead body cannot be burdened with having to pay for how to dispose you. So that's also a reminder, like don't think, oh, I don't plan to die, you know. This will only happen after I'm done wandering around. Aha, right, sure. So on the one hand, it's a very good reminder. Every night it says, you put that sack of money, that sum of money, and say, that's for funeral expense, whoever finds my body. Yeah. So we start by settle your affairs. And in settling your affairs, it becomes an act of kindness and generosity. It also becomes an act of letting go. And this is all part of that gaining that bigger mind, that more sublime heart. Don't see it as, something like, oh, I've got to do this. And no, see it as this is your gift to those who have to deal with you. This body afterwards, all this paperwork. So start by settling your affairs. In settling of your affairs, yeah. So of course I don't know much, but there are. I've next week I'm going to share with you a document that has a checklist, and then it has more specific more specific to the Buddhist stuff, and also you can kind of take that and apply it and modify it to what is meaningful to you. So in terms of settling your affairs, it's getting all the legal stuff lined up and everything. And also in the Buddhist tradition, we say part of that settling of your affairs is don't just think about, oh, my stuff, I'm giving it to my son, my daughter, my this, my that. It's like you need to purify your wealth. Meaning, most of your wealth did not come from the people that you're giving to. In fact, none of it comes to the people that you're giving it to the people that you're normally giving it to. Recognize that majority of your wealth came from so many directions. It's just that you were lucky enough, fortunate enough to figure out how to siphon it to you. Now, so we say they came from the 10 directions. The normal 8 up and down. That's how Buddhists come up with 10 directions. And they say that this wealth came from the 10 directions. So do something for the 10 directions. So leave things for the 10 directions. In fact, Buddhist monks and nuns are not supposed to leave what they leave behind to their family, because we say it will burden them. It will burden them. So I don't know whether you believe it or not, but look at all the wealthy families and the burden of that wealth. Within 1 or 2 generations, everybody gets destroyed. Say that's the burden. So when you do this, when you make these decisions, make it intentional and think about this will benefit others. And then one of the greatest of that would be also this can benefit others. So you can settle this too. Donate this. And donate this to a good cause. But of course, every one of us feels very different about that. But think about that, consider that. You don't need this anymore, you know? Does the cemetery need you? No, I don't think so. So what Tibetans do, maybe most of you have heard, right? Sky burial. Yeah, so the practice of sky burial in Tibet partly came out of a practical a set of reasons, but also spiritual, which is that when someone has passed away, this body is taken to these places called sky burial grounds, whereby every part of the body is cut up and fed to vultures. I've seen, and but more than seeing is the sound of the chopping up of the body that is very clear in my mind. That thud, you see that. So in Tibet, the practical set of reasons, at least historically up until recently, it's very expensive to import wood for cremation. And then the ground that is easily, that you can dig easily, you need it for agriculture. And you can't throw into the river, it'll contaminate the water. That is also very important. And so the efficient way to dispose the body is to do sky burials. Of course, now, there are crematoriums like in Tibet, but most Tibetans prefer not to. They have also, in that sense, a very different sense of body, And then the other reason is for Tibetans, although, not killing is an ideal, but there's also the reality, again, of life, living in such a high elevation. Very few plants grow. So Tibetans, until recently, by and large, are not vegetarians. So they have to eat other animals. So then the thought is that at least at the end, this can feed other animals. Yeah. I don't think the state legislature of North Carolina is interested in taking up this bill. One could hope, but I don't think so. So I don't know the chances of getting a sky burial, right? But we have, right, our alternatives to that. So think about that. So that's settling. That's settling our affairs. So that's one thing for sure to do. Then the other types of settling is settling the heart mind. So to settle the heart mind, there are the kind of like there is the training or just living life, being a good person, right? But not in a good person in the way that the stereotype of what the South thinks a good person is, meaning nice. Don't mean that, right? Developing a good heart. So that I don't need to talk too much about, I think you know what that is about. So in the Buddhist tradition, other than talking about that, it also talks about having an anchor that we train with now, so that when the process of dying unfolds actively, we can turn to that anchor to provide the support that we need. Because at that point, we can't count on others. Again, we are the only ones, taking that journey. And so we need to find an anchor, right? So this is what we call, the Buddhist terminology for this is what we call refuge, taking refuge. So in the Buddhist tradition, so when we started this afternoon's program, we say, in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent. I take refuge until Bodhi, the state of being awake, is reached. So that's refuge for us. Something that we turn to and rely on as a source of inspiration, as a source of assurance, as a reminder of our highest ideals. Then more concretely, you might have heard of things like mantras, right? So prayer as a way to habituate that anchor, that refuge. So one of the most common mantras in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is the mantra of compassion, love and compassion, also called the six-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om and Hum are syllables without specific meanings, although a lot of meanings have been loaded onto the two syllables. Mani Padme literally is the jewel in the lotus. That jewel, we say, is the Buddha mind. That lotus is this body that we are in. But more so, this Om Mani Padme Hum, these six syllables. So the Buddha described the cycle of birth and death, and infinite lifetimes of circling in this cycle of birth and death. We call this the wheel or the round of confusion, samsara. In samsara, Buddha says there are six possible life forms that you can be born in from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And each of them are characterized by a particular, what we call mental defilement would predominate. So we say the God realm, the mental defilement that predominates there is pride. Then in the realm of demigods, and these are the natural enemy of the gods, the predominant mental defilement is jealousy. So the haves and the have-nots of this universe. So they are in constant battle. Then the third is the human realm, and they say the predominant mental defilement is desire. I want this, I want that. I want to achieve this, I want to achieve that. Including I don't want this, I don't want that. Sometimes in some texts they say the predominant mental defilement is laziness or complacency. Then next is the animal realm. It's characterized by, literally it says stupidity. Now, it's not cool to say that our pets are stupid, so we don't use that word anymore. A list of words that you cannot use anymore. When you pay attention to what it's saying, right, it's not saying animals are stupid. It's basically saying a life that is completely controlled by instincts. Very little chance or opportunity to make moral decisions, only driven by instincts. Hunger, fear, right? Reproduction. So that's what predominates. Then the realm of hungry goes. What predominates is greed, avarice. Then the hell realms. Why are the hell realms always described with fires? Except we have cold hells, but just bracket that aside. It's the fire of hate, anger, resentment. That is what is burning. Burning, burning, burning with anger and resentment. So this mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, 6 syllables, it's said to block the gateways that lead to rebirth in any of them. It blocks the 6 mental defilements from leading into rebirth. So when these 6 doors are blocked, then that's another way of saying you become free from this cycle. Yeah, so many things in Tibetan religion involves the 6 syllables. There is a saying among Tibetans, like they say, among Tibetan people, they say, all children, right? All babies, first thing they learn to say is mama. Tibetans, Om Mani Padme Hum. It's like, that's the first thing they learn how to say, Om Mani Padme Hum. So Om Mani Padme Hum is carved onto stones, is written on the walls. Om Mani Padme Hum graffiti is everywhere. Om Mani Padme Hum is recited continuously, to the degree that, so this prayer wheel, we call it a prayer wheel, it's basically Om Mani Padme Hum. So on the surface of outside, there's the syllables Om Mani Padme Hum, written in such a way that so that when I turn, so then it's turning in the right direction. Om Mani Padme Hum. So not only that, so I can show you. People have asked me, what is this? I said, this is the only instance of, and I would like other people to help me see if there's other instances. But as far as I could tell, this is the only instance of sanctioned cheating in any religion. So inside of this prayer wheel, rolled up like a roll of toilet paper, right, is the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum printed very small. So there is maybe 50,000 Om Mani Padme Hums printed in here. So the idea is that with every turn, I have said 50,000. I have sent out 50,000 Om Mani Padme Hums into the world. So now they even have these with microfilm. So in a size like this, 50 million Om Mani Padme Hums. And it's actually sanctioned. Can anyone think of any cases where there's sanctioned cheating in any religion? Yeah, so as you turn this, Now, joking aside. This is a subtle device. Appropriate, for the Tibetan context. Of course, I think a little odd walking up and down, Haywood Road, turning one of these. Well, maybe not so odd, I don't know. It's Asheville, it's West Asheville after all. Asheville has gone to the tourists, but it's West Asheville after all. I've seen weirder things. My Buddhist friends who come visit here, Buddhist monks, and they're like, love it here. Nobody bats an eye, when they see. It's like the most normal thing, So this is a way, a constant reminder of Om Mani Padme Hum. So, especially like older Tibetans, constantly, they're turning this. When they're talking, when they're walking, when they're chit-chatting, even when they're gossiping, if they're yelling at people, they're still turning their Om Mani Padme Hum. Which is, you might say, oh, that's hypocrisy. But no, it's a constant reminder of our higher ideals, our higher aspirations. We see love and compassion as our higher ideals. We may not live up to it in every moment, but the fact that we always hold this to be our highest ideals, that this is what we're aiming for, this is what we are trying to reach. And this freeing of our minds so that it's not anchored on things that will fail us. Love and compassion doesn't belong to anyone, doesn't belong to any religion. Love and compassion continues. And if your sense of I can be anchored on love and compassion, then you don't die. There's no place to go. There's no going or no coming. Same. One of the great figures of modern Tibetan Buddhism is known as the 16th Karmapa. He died in the early 80s unexpectedly when he was visiting the US. And so then his health suddenly took a very quick downturn. So he was hospitalized in one of the best hospitals right outside of Chicago, I think. He wasn't that old at that point, but he had some kind of cancer. I forgot what it was. So a group of doctors, of course, were taking care of him. And so this has been, told in Buddhist stories a lot. As the 16th Karmapa, I think he was in the hospital for a few weeks, if not months. At a certain point, like the doctors could read in the heart machine that he was having these heart attacks, minor attacks. But it's not visibly affecting him. So much so that his knowledge of English was rather limited, but he knew a few words. So after a while, all these nurses and doctors know to expect whenever they ask him, "How are you?" They ended up with this kind of like a running joke between him and the doctors and nurses attending him. He would say, "Nothing happens." And they're like, "Well, that's not what the machine is saying." He says, "Nothing happens." And they said, he just remained like it wasn't affecting him, but the cancer was eating his body. And it was falling apart, But he was able to maintain his composure, not in a forced way, but he did not identify anymore, with this. He identified with love and compassion. And knowing that doesn't die. That doesn't die. Okay, comments, questions, curiosities. Good time also if you need to go to the bathroom to get up and won't miss anything that you think I'm going to present. Can I ask a kind soul like Alex or Nathan to pay attention to the Zoom chat? So you folks out there on Zoom, if you have a question or comment, you can type in the chat as well, and somebody will read it out loud. Alex.
practices you do to untangle the entanglements?
What specific practices do you do to untangle entanglements? Aha. Well, before we even talk about what specific practices, right? Now, of course, from this question, we know this is someone who has been hanging out with Buddhists. So they're talking about practices, right? So at least in the West, I think the way Buddhism has kind of been presented, it's a kind of like, what techniques can I use, right? To fix what problem? And maybe that's why Buddhism is kind of popular, because especially like Americans, you're very practical people. It's like, let's cut to the chase, what can I do? Right? What can I fix? Yeah. What can you fix? What you can fix is very inconvenient. It's your habits. And to fix your habits, you have to change your life. To change your life, you have to make sacrifices. Bad news. So, putting aside technique or practices, you have to be convinced that entanglements are a mess, right? You have to be convinced that entanglements is just a drag. And then you have to have a determination then to say, I don't want that. But don't do it because the Buddha says so. Don't do it because, I will look like a good Buddhist, because these days is kind of cool. Not for those reasons, but because. So rather than any technique or practice in that sense, pay attention to, right, the heaviness of being entangled. Why we don't do that is because we have found ways to distract ourselves. Every time some entanglement becomes heavy, we don't let go, We find something to distract us, and we carry that entanglement. We carry that load. We don't actually unload. We simply turn our heads and go in a different direction, and then add that load, and add that load, and add that load, and add and add and add. So we're constantly looking away. That's why the first noble truth, the noble truth of bhava, becoming, is suffering, is dukkha. The verb that the Buddha gave there is recognize, 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 pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. But everything is telling us not to pay attention. In fact, not just not to pay attention, but how can I get rid of this? So pay attention. By really skillfully paying attention, a determination will come up. Once the determination is there that I am done with this, right? Then you don't need to even practice. Yes, there's a question? A comment.
Yeah, I wonder if you could give some guidance on, I'm a caregiver, and for my mother. My wife is also here and caregiver as well. She lives with us, and we've been with her over a slow decline, and she's kind of chosen to kind of give up. And we've done everything we can with encouragement and anything that we could do to keep her doing the things necessary to live a healthy life, that she's chosen not to, and now she wants to die. So we're with this person to try to have compassion
Mm-hmm.
and not be in the suffering, but that's a challenge.
Yes, of course.
So it's a constant refocusing and falling down and refocusing.
Of course, yes.
But any guidance in being with that person and still remaining compassionate, but also not completely being in the suffering.
Yes, of course. So, as they say, every, what is that? The oxygen mask rule, right? On the plane, right? Yeah, put it on yourself first before helping the next person. So I think you already recognize that, the need to have good grounding. So that good grounding is that's a good question, because how in that situation and in most situations is basically bringing in together nothing happens, right? And love and compassion. On the surface, if you really think about it, they look like they're opposed, because at least the way we think of love and compassion, it entails getting very involved, right? And maybe all wrapped up in the situation. And so that can lead to at first pain, and then even annoyance, and even giving up. Yeah, like the conventional love and compassion can, if we don't handle that right, it can go in that direction, right? Compassion fatigue, all of that, and then resentment, and then guilt over the resentment, all of that. So love and compassion, we say, without nothing happens, which the technical term is wisdom. Love and compassion without wisdom can lead to a lot of suffering. So-called wisdom, nothing happens without love and compassion, can lead to the other extreme, like narcissism. Nothing happens. Just grow up, get over it. We all die. Both. How to bring together these two? There's no secret to it. There's no easy cure to it. But for us to be able to always come back to understanding that these are two sides of the same coin. So how can I have love and compassion in a way that is informed by wisdom? So part of the wisdom training is a set of things, actually. Like if you're asking specifically from like the Buddhist answer to this, well, I guess that's why you're here. It includes things like, a clear understanding of the principle of causality, which is called karma. Now, I say a clear understanding and a careful understanding because we know, and for sure, this notion of karma has been misused and even abused. This is not about you deserve or you don't deserve. Because when you talk about the language of deserve or don't deserve, then you have placed, the Buddha's teachings of karma into a very different context. Or rewards and punishment, right? It's not about that. The karma, in a way, you have to de-emotionalize this notion of karma and see it in its more technical operation, which is like gravity. This is a particular force, right, that explains how things happen. And how things happen is they happen according to this principle of causality. For something to happen, not only is there a need for a cause for it to happen, but there needs to be a supporting set of conditions for that to all come together and something to happen. So the more we understand this principle of causality, the more we understand, for example, no matter how much I want to make this person happy, I cannot. No matter how much I want to keep someone safe, I cannot completely do that. So I can do what I can, but also to recognize they have their own set of karmic causalities, which is very complex. But at the same time, so that's one in the area of like what we call wisdom. And nothing happens. What is that nothing happens? That nothing happens is also talking about the set of teachings that we call understanding the nature of change and impermanence and the momentary nature of all experiences. That all experiences are momentary. That it feels that it is not momentary, that it feels like it's forever there, is because we have added a layer to it. So that means when we feel like this situation is impossible, we have added that layer of impossible. It is just what it is. That's what's unfolding right now. As in, she's been difficult, or but it's not that it's impossible, right? Impossible is just this label that we add on to what is. What is just is, and what is, it changes every moment. So recognizing that if we bring some space into that, and sometimes that space is actually physically space. Step away. But more than the physical step away, it's just, and sometimes it's not appropriate to step away because it might trigger the other person becoming even more distressed. But being present and, as they say, provide that space. So it's this delicate dance, right, between wisdom and love and compassion, and understanding that they are two sides of the same coin. So there are, back to the question about practices, these are all the practices. Of course, there are techniques, but techniques are secondary. Motivation is primary. Once we get the motivation, not like, motivation is not like a switch, get, don't get, get, don't get. It's way more fuzzy than that. So also don't concretize that, get or don't get. Sometimes get better, sometimes don't get. Then when you get frustrated, so like, well, that's also the causes and conditions. This just is, So to de-emotionalize is the wisdom side. To care and be spacious is the love and compassion side. We call these the two wings of enlightenment. Yes?
I have two.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, you spoke about the people who have to do the work with the corpse and the
Yes.
So my first one is, can you speak about grief and the practice of grief?
Mm-hmm.
My second one is a question about suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and that topic kind of generally, and maybe more specifically suicide among young people as a phenomenon.
Sure. So grief, there are a few kind of angles to take, and then you have to consider all these different angles, and then so one angle is in terms of like if you are attending to someone who is dying, then generally we say you have to take that out of that picture yourself, because you want to provide the dying person the best possible finale, so to say. So next week we're going to talk about specifics in the Buddhist tradition, because in part this series came up because Gary asked, Gary over there asking, I don't know what, like the actual, like, say a Buddhist person is dying, well, what are we supposed to do or not do? Next week, I'll talk about that, and then maybe you'll see more concretely what I mean by that. But there's a tremendous emphasis on providing an environment where you don't trigger attachment or entanglements, like they can't let go. Don't die, which actually in Asian culture, we're big on that, like Chinese, someone's dying and everyone's like, don't go, don't die. Yeah, it's like, oh boy. And also there's a lot of actually superstition. Like I'm ethnically Chinese, born in Malaysia, but in the Chinese community, it's like nobody talks about death. Yes, and in fact, when I announced this series, some of my friends in Malaysia was like, the next day is New Year. It's kind of bad luck to talk about these things. I was like, well, it's a good way to start the new year. But yeah, so so there's that. Now, the ones who are left behind. Yes. So there, first of all, I think, and maybe, next week also you'll hear some things. There is basically, first of all, the basic understanding first is what the Buddha has to say about emotions is that emotions that we call good and bad are simply, good and bad is based on what we like and what we don't like. So we don't like feeling loss, so we call it bad, right? But loss is just loss. Itself is just loss. So if we can be present again for the loss that we are feeling, right? And recognizing the pain that we are feeling. So it's a matter of like, are we feeding the pain, or are we letting the pain have its place and run its course? So that's important. Let it have its place and let it run its course. Not so easy. Easier would be to ignore it, and easier to feed it. Because in both two scenarios, it's easier, and in some ways more dramatic. And we're all addicted to that. Walk away, right? Suppress. In one not Buddhist text, but in the Chinese spiritual tradition, in Confucianism, one of the great figures of Confucianism wrote about an essay about the role of rituals. And in particular, in the Chinese Confucian context, is the ritual of mourning, and especially mourning, grieving over parents. That's like the most important grieving to do for our parents, not our children, parents. And according to the traditions, not established even by Confucianism, but even earlier traditions, it says that a child is to mourn for their parent for 3 years. Prescription, not description. In fact, in ancient China, basically, if you're privileged, you can do that. Because it says the emperor, if you are in the service of the emperor, has to give you 3 years leave. So we have maternity leave and paternity leave. This is mourning leave, 3 years. And for 3 years, you live close to where the grave is, live in a hut, live in simplicity, and you grieve. So anyway, so those are some of the details. Yeah? But the essay he writes about, he says, it's really interesting. This was composed in 2nd or 3rd century BC. And he says rituals, well, first of all, in this particular figure, he says, rituals are the result of sages of the past experiencing and understanding how certain rituals are helpful and certain rituals are harmful. He says, helpful rituals are those rituals that regulate our emotions and provides, regulate in what way? Giving it just enough space for it to be actualized, but not so much space that it becomes indulgent. So he says there are rituals in partying. How to have a good party without excessive. And how to mourn without it becoming harmful. Then particularly about grieving or mourning, he says, if grieving is not given its proper place, it will manifest later in life. And the symptoms that he described is what we would describe as depression. 3rd century BC, he wrote very clearly his understanding of that. So to give space, so it's figuring out, when are we feeding it? That's when it becomes harmful, right? Then quickly about suicide. The Buddhist position on suicide, not surprisingly, like most major world religions, is to say it's something that is negative. Now, Buddhist definition of negative means suffering. So the intense form of suffering that led up to that act is what we are called to recognize. And so because of that, and then again, from the different perspective, right? Whether the person who made that decision or the persons left behind in the wake of that, there are different ways to help in that situation. Now, yes?
So where does the Tibetan Book of the Dead fit into any of this discussion?
The Tibetan Book of the Dead, well, the so-called Tibetan Book of the Dead, and the title is based on the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The original title, or the title, the actual title of this book is called The Great Liberation Upon Hearing. So meaning it's a text that is chanted out loud as someone is dying. And also within a period of 21 days, that is still read out loud as like a manual, a guide to the person who have just passed, and say, and now you are going to experience this, and when you experience this. So next week, I will go into some of the details there that might be relevant more generally. There are aspects in its description of generally how dying occurs. We talk about this body being formed from 4 physical elements: wind, fire, water, and earth. So it's motility, heat, fluidity, and density. So these are the elements. So when these elements begin to dissolve, that's the language, right? So the outer sign of these elements dissolving, for example, so here the denser of the 4 elements is the first element that dissolves when we are dying. So whether we die a quote unquote natural death, so taking a period of time to die, or we die an instantaneous, like a terrible accident, it says that it's the same process, but how long it takes. So in that sense, from a Buddhist perspective, we want natural death. That's considered ideal, because you can, there are practices, habits that we form now to how to experience all these stages of dissolution. And so then it includes things like there are outer signs. That means externally what people can observe is going on with you. And then there are inner experiences that only you know. And then when you experience that, so it says that at that time it feels like, everything is weighing down on you physically as your physical elements dissolve. And what people can observe is that you are very heavy. You can't lift yourself, and it's just like stuck. Like you try to move and you can't. And so what people can observe. So there are details like that is rather interesting.
Yeah, do people in Tibet use it? Do they do it, like the kind of practice?
Yes.
You're talking about?
Yeah. So familiarity with what will happen as it unfolds is said to basically provide context and reassurance, and say, okay, next this is going to happen. Next this is going to happen. Then the secret sign is the mind will start playing tricks. And then they say, throughout all of this, recognize that it's simply the mind doing its thing and the body doing its thing. And get out of the way. So when we started this meditation, I already planted the seeds. Get out of the way. Let body and mind settle. Settle. And learn how to be content and happy, and even experience the natural pleasure that is there, that is not anchored on sensory experiences. So then you habitualize that, so that when death happens, you don't tell the body and the mind, do this, do that. Get out of the way and recognize this is just how it is. It's doing its thing now.
Someone on Zoom asked, what does Buddha say about whether a specific identity persists through the various incarnations?
What does the Buddha say about a specific identity persisting throughout incarnations? The Buddha uses the analogy of a river. He says there is continuity in the sense that there is a river, like rivers have a particular continuity, but there is no concrete soul or self or identity in that sense that remains unchanging. So for sure we could say that is the Mississippi River, and that is the French Broad, right? And that is the Shenandoah, and to that, of course, there are three distinctive rivers. They're not the same river. But what you call the Shenandoah, what you call the French Broad, what you call the Mississippi, at no point at all does anything remain unchanging. The physical banks of that river is constantly being changed. The water that flows through is constantly changing. All the creatures that are there constantly changing. So it's a constant process. And so there is continuity in that sense. Then you say, well, why should I care then? Well, don't care if you don't want to care. But if you're going to, pee upriver, just remember not to drink downriver, a few minutes later. If you can deal with, peeing upriver and hopping downriver to drink, fine, go ahead. Yeah, we wouldn't say things like, if you say don't care, right, about future life, if you think more about it, why care about tomorrow? The self that is making some choices now is not the self that is experiencing it tomorrow, but we still care. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah, near-death experiences in terms of there are stories like that. Yes, they don't die. Like time is not right, and then yeah. Yes, and it tends to match, what the text. Yeah. So then you say, huh, so what's going on here, right? And then you're like, well, another culture, right? They have near-death experiences, but it doesn't match what you are talking about in near-death experiences. There are certain things that match, and there are certain things that don't match, right? So how would be a Buddhist response to that? Then I said, well, your mind determines. So you have to see, what kind of conditioning that your mind provides, right? But then conditioning or not, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. So there are also things that, condition or not, nurture or not, there is a nature side. But it's not just nature, there is also a lot of nurture. So, for example, we come back to that refuge, right? The mantra, all that. So how do we translate this for people who are caring for others, who may or may not have any kind of Buddhist background, more likely than not, right? So you have to translate that principle of refuge for that person. Even a secular humanist person with no sense of God or afterlife, you can still translate that. What is that refuge that you can provide them as they are making this finale? Yes.
I went through the death and I thought it was this,
Mm-hmm.
was both difficult and hard, and also was experience. I was really fortunate that she was really ready,
Mm-hmm.
gave all of us everything we needed.
Right.
But when you said that last thing about what refuge, for my mom, it was her legacy.
Mm-hmm.
It was not so much accomplishments, but what she had given on in the form of her 5 children.
Her deeds.
We all took of her.
Her deeds.
Her deeds, yeah. And it was really very, she made it easy for all of us. I wish everyone could have that experience. She made it very beautiful, and we just could focus on. And then we all were able to carry that on now. As
Right.
well, Mom would say,
Yes.
let's get along. Mom
Yes.
would say, it's very easy. But I mean, she did struggle. She did
Of course.
struggle. But, yeah, that was a kind of her version of it.
Yes. So deeds, So actually here in the Buddhist tradition, we don't have like do the good deeds and hide them necessarily, so much emphasis on that. In fact, we say recognize the good that you have done and register that, so that when the time comes, you're like, no, this is good. I have done good. No worries anymore. No regrets. Good. This is good. Deeds. Then, of course, it's like if then the deeds add another layer, right? I did this and I did that. Okay, now you have a problem. Right? So there's legacy in that sense, right? And then control from beyond the grave, right? Then now we have a problem. So it's often like, all the problems that I think we human beings end up with come from a good place. So back to the Confucian, sage who says, you need a boundary so that, it doesn't spill over to the other side. So there's a story from the Hindu tradition about this refuge, right? This So this man had heard, teachings on like how you have to remember, God at all times, especially when you are dying. You have to remember God. So he thought, okay, well, that's easy. I have 3 sons. I'm going to name them Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, like the 3, great gods of Hinduism, or 3 aspects of God in Hinduism: the creator, preserver, and the destroyer. Right? So then he says, so for sure, one of them is going to be around when I die, or maybe all 3 of them. So when the time came, he thought he had it figured out. When time came. Of course, all 3 of them were there. Brahma was there, Vishnu was there, and Shiva was there. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to say the name of God, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Except that, he got the technique, but he didn't have the attitude. Then he started to try to micromanage Brahma and Vishnu and Shiva's life. Got entangled. So there are Buddhist like statements that sound kind of stark, advising like people who are like, kind of intense like spiritual practice, saying to those like, can you see that, the ideal for you when you die is like a wild animal. What does that mean? When a wild animal dies alone in the forest, and dogs even, if they can run, they will run away.
Instinct.
Yeah, and not so much the instinct, but like the thing about wanting to be alone. Yeah, and so this being alone is not about not loving people, It's knowing that it's time for me to go, and I can be free. In the Taoist tradition, I think it was Chuangzi, a great sage in the Taoist tradition. He went to attend his teacher's funeral. Then when he came back, he was kind of in a bad mood, and his wife said, wait, why are you in such a bad mood? He was like, that hypocrite. He's talking about his teacher, It's like, what? It's like, that hypocrite. And it's like, what do you mean? It's like, all these people crying and wailing, what did he do to make them cry and wail like that when he died? I mean, kind of extreme, right? But it's making a point. Are you going to live a life when you entangle everyone around you? Or are you going to love and care for them in a way that doesn't entangle them like that? Why are they crying and wailing? I mean, you don't quite want either, right? People celebrating, yes, dead! Both those, we can all agree on that first one. So we are all avoiding the first one. But here it says even the second type. Can you live in a way that also doesn't create that? Really emphasizing, love in a way that doesn't entangle. Not easy. Ideals, right? So it's not saying that you have to be like that before you are going to be okay. But it is saying if you understand that ideal, right, it becomes easier. Yes?
But even if you, let's say I as the person dying, understands that ideal, doesn't it depend on the other person?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of
because
course.
I understand that.
Of course. No, in this case,
For me, I'll be heartbroken, even though I understand ideal.
yes, of course. No. This story is an extreme case because it's the teacher.
Oh,
right? It's like hypocrite, that's why. Yeah, it's like hypocrite, you know. He talked one talk, but then he was doing something else, you know, making them love him so much in such a ridiculous way. Yeah, culturally doesn't translate. Don't do that. Okay, I'm giving this to say, what is the take-home lesson? You know, but yeah, but or whatever tradition, you know, like when we translate across traditions and translate across time, we cannot say, oh, Buddha did that, therefore I'm doing this. It's like, no, 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 no. What's the take-home lesson in when he did this or that, you know? Otherwise, you know, Buddha had a beard, now we all need to have a beard, you know. Buddha didn't have a beard, now we cannot have a beard. Then we have a problem. At least from the Buddhist perspective. It's like, no, it's like, we want to see, right? So in my teaching of you know, students and all that, I said, you know, like, so this is more a footnote, nothing to do with this. It's like, in a way, my job is to present to you what I know to be what the tradition says. And I will even be very exacting. I will correct you when I think you got that wrong. I will do that. That's my job. But I said, however, when you actually put this into practice, understand that your process is your process. And you need to be true to your process. Whatever the dogma says is a reference point. It's not a commandment, it's a reference point. So to that degree, you need to get the reference point right. And I need to make sure that you got the reference point right. But where you are standing in relation to that reference point, I don't know. Only you know. So same with these teachings, especially next week when more specifics are being discussed, you know, like from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right? I think sometimes people read that and think, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen. Or, no, this is not what's going to happen. Or, let me take this and observe. Is this what's happening? You know, don't do that, you know, annoying the dying person. Hey, 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 are you experiencing this now? Yeah. So especially when we go into that, you know, to understand that, you know, like if I say, no, 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 not like that, I'm not saying, I'm not saying like, you know, when you're dying, someone telling you, no, 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 wrong, wrong, wrong. Die the other way. That's not how it works, okay? You're going to die the way you're going to die. Yes, you know, and also next week we'll talk about how to actually help someone based on what we know is helpful. And also not insisting, no, you only can die this way and not that way. So how to know what is helpful and how to also, in the end, it's your process. Doesn't matter how many books, how many scriptures, how many prophets, how many Buddhas tell you it's like this, like this, like that. It's your process. Only you will know. If you're lucky, you will know. Most of the time, we don't know. We're not present for it. So to become present now makes it possible to be present then. So part of the meditation of learning to be present. When you can turn up for life, you can turn up for dying, you can turn up for death. When you don't turn up for life, there's no chance of turning up for that big farewell. It's 5:00. So we should end now. I have a New Year party to go to. Party like there's no tomorrow. Maybe there's no tomorrow, who knows? There's one funny joke, they say. Some monks went to a restaurant and saw a sign that didn't used to be there. And the sign says, tomorrow free food. So they came back next day And so they ordered a bunch of food. And then the bill came. They're like, well, it says tomorrow is free food. I say, yeah, tomorrow is free food. It's tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes, you know? So don't spend too much time tomorrow. It's today. So at the end, we do something that we call the dedication of merit. So I'm going to read this dedication. So you can just listen. So the idea of dedication of merit is that recognize that whatever good, whatever helpful, things that you have heard today, recognize that others, are also looking for that good. Not exactly in a set of information, but others are looking for how to settle their minds, how to settle their hearts. And think about how probably a lot of people are not getting that. Now that you have gotten some of it, may that become a cause for others to meet that when the time and the conditions are right for them. Think about all those beings in all directions, that all of us are looking for happiness and not wanting suffering. But as much as we all wish for that, we don't know how to exactly achieve that. So we wish that may all beings be able to find their way to happiness that is not dependent on unreliable conditions and things. With a determination to accomplish the highest welfare for all sentient beings, who surpass even a wish-granting jewel, may we train to hold them as supremely precious. Whenever we associate with others, may we train to think of ourselves as the lowest among all, and respectfully hold others to be supreme from the very depths of our hearts. In all actions, may we train to search into our minds, and as soon as a mental defilement arises that will endanger ourselves or others, we will firmly face and avert it. May we train to cherish beings of bad nature and those oppressed by strong evil deeds and suffering, as if we have found a precious treasure very difficult to find. When others out of jealousy treat me badly with abuse, slander, and so on, may we train to take on all loss and offer victory to them. When one whom we have benefited with great hope unreasonably hurts us very badly, may we train to view that person as an excellent spiritual guide. In short, may we train to offer to everyone without exception all help and happiness directly and indirectly, and secretly take upon ourselves all harm and suffering of our mothers. May we train to keep all these practices undefiled by the stains of the 8 mundane concerns, and by understanding all phenomena to be like illusions, be released from the bondage of entanglements. Thank you for coming. Tomorrow we party, actually, over here. So there's a potluck from noon to 3. If you have time, please come by. It's a potluck. Bring something if you can. Bring something that reflects the celebration if you can. If you cannot, don't worry about any of it. We ask that what you bring is either vegetarian or vegan. And tomorrow we celebrate the Lunar New Year. So there's a few things happening here aside from the food, and we don't know exactly what they are, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, that's it. If you can help us put things away and all of that, and thank you. Have a good evening. Bye. Ta-ta, everyone. Yeah, over there.